Hi, I'm Michael Gordon. I'm an analyst on CFRA's Legal Edge research team, and I'm here with the head of CFRA Legal Edge Research, Nick Rodelli, who we're going to talk about the major tech platforms, particularly the hearing last week before the House Judiciary Committee. So, Nick, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'll kind of just start out with a high level view. I think it was pretty informative. You could tell that this committee was well prepared. They had been fully briefed on detailed documents and theories of antitrust liability, and so it's kind of a bit of a contrast to some prior congressional hearings involving the tech industry, which were more kind of rudimentary. Just understanding the basic technology and how these companies work. So that was interesting. Apart from that, I think there were, varying degrees of probing depending on, which company we're talking about, which we'll get into. But maybe we should kick it off specifically with Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook was interesting. We saw Mark Zuckerberg being confronted with some not so fortunate emails about the Instagram acquisition, the reasons for doing it. I think that he said that it could be very disruptive. So, is that meaningful for anything?
I think it is. I think, regulators, if they were to bring a case against Facebook related to acquisitions, they would need to show an anti-competitive intent. They would also have to show, the correct market definition, and ultimately, very likely would have to win a battle of the experts over, what would the world look like if the Instagram deal would not have been done? That is, if Instagram had just been a standalone company, how might the competitive environment have been impacted? So those are all difficult, hurdles for the government, but certainly the emails that came out in the hearing provided some fodder on that issue of anti-competitive intent of prior mergers.
Yeah, and one of the other things we saw with Facebook was Zuckerberg taking a swipe at Apple, going off his written script of what he was going to say in his prepared remarks, and talking about Apple. Perhaps that has something to do with the IDFA that is going to be discouraged from use by users in iOS 14. This is something that Facebook's warned about in their calls and financial statements. So, but that actually brings us to one of the other companies that was that testified, had their CEO testify at the hearing, and that was Tim Cook of Apple. So, what did you think of Tim Cook?
Well, he was obviously meticulously prepared and did a really good job of answering questions and being very credible. I think the most interesting thing that he said was in describing the App Store, he described it as just another feature of the iPhone. That actually gets to the issue of market definition, with Apple arguing that we would assume that the relevant market is maybe smartphones, or something very, very broad where when you look at the market definition, Apple would have a small share. The counter view there would be that the App Store itself, or at least the distribution of apps on the App Store, that itself is a relevant product market. The committee didn't get into that in any great detail, but that was an interesting statement from Tim Cook. The other issue that had been raised by the committee in document requests but did not come out at the hearing is the issue of the payments from Google to Apple, which we think are north of $10 billion a year for the default search engine status on iOS. That question did not come up at the hearing.
It's interesting they didn't come up, but Google certainly did. Sundar Pichai was testifying at the hearing as well. What I found most interesting about Pichai's testimony was the back and forth that he had with Representative Jayapal from Washington, talking about Google's ad marketplace and analogizing it to like a Wall Street broker-dealer, where Google is acting on both the buy side and the sell side of advertising, but there are no real regulations to keep them honest. So I thought that was interesting. Anything else that you found interesting with Pichai's testimony?
Yeah, it was, often he didn't get a chance to actually fully answer. He was interrupted, it seemed like, more than the other CEOs at the hearing. I think his answers seem to be very careful and very kind of circumscribed, and not a lot of content necessarily in some of the answers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the interchange of the day, but involving Alphabet, definitely was the exchange with Representative Jayapal. It was very kind of illuminating of a very complicated ad market to kind of have it simplified as she did, and I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, it leads us to maybe a clue as to the we've heard that a case filed by the Department of Justice or the state attorneys general could come anytime. So perhaps that's kind of a lead into that. But also, speaking of Representative Jayapal, she represents the district that contains Amazon's headquarters, where Jeff Bezos was testifying from at the same hearing. So Amazon seemed to have get fewer tough questions about their antitrust. They did get questions about the third-party sellers, but a lot of that was their treatment of the third-party sellers rather than their antitrust, I think. But I think that there were definitely some antitrust issues that were raised by the committee. What did you think?
Yeah, I think it was interesting. It seemed like Amazon, the questions and certainly the documents that were referred to, was very limited by way of like internal documents or at least new documents, things that we hadn't seen before. And that's a contrast to Facebook, where as we discussed, we have a lot of new information from the documents. The other thing is that AWS, of course, for investors, arguably is the most significant segment of the company. It was a subject of a document request or document requests from the committee. It did come up, there was one question on AWS that seemed to not get a lot of attention. I thought that Jeff Bezos's answer was, kind of very interesting and could be read as somewhat of an admission that Amazon uses the data on AWS to identify what products and services that they should introduce. So I thought that was intriguing.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's one of the other kind of theories of liability that we've seen. So I think we've addressed what happened with all four companies. Anything else you think we should talk about before we wrap it up?
Just a couple of things. The next steps from here, which would include from the committee, a report and likely recommendations, and that could be both on kind of enforcement recommendations and also specific kind of legislative policy initiatives. That could be interesting in terms of, might that put pressure on regulators in terms of the facts and the theories of a case that the committee may lay out. The other thing to keep in mind, which is off topic for today, but that we also have the issue of Europe, and European regulators have been quite active in this area. I think that there's an assumption that those cases could take a long time to kind of play out, but they do have an approach that they can take, a tactic using interim measures to seek relief in the short term, even as the investigation plays itself out. So that's something to keep an eye on and a subject for another day.
Yeah, it's interesting. We haven't seen a whole lot of those interim measures being used, but that could be interesting. So I think we've discussed all of the things that are coming up next in that hearing. So we want to thank you all for joining us for this conversation. Thank you, Nick, for this as well. If you have any other questions, you can contact us. You can contact us for more information at cservices@cfraresearch.com. Thanks again, and we hope to speak to you soon.